Silk dress, pinkish gold hair pulled back into a loose hairstyle, eyes as blue as sapphires, sharp but also pink lips. Princess Eve von Albion is so beautiful that it is impossible not to fall in love with her. This place is the Albion Empire from the novel The Flower of Tragedy. And right now, our main character is stuck in the body of a character from a novel. People made so much noise as if they were seeing a celebrity for the first time. But these looks were far from admiration, but pure fear. Princess Eve is cruel and mad, and she always causes a stir in the Empire. She threw tantrums in front of the Emperor, screaming and sobbing. Even without receiving permission for the wedding, Eve ordered the maids to prepare for it. Suspecting some ladies of flirting with her man, she pulled out their hair. When the Grand Duke rejected her, Eve trashed her entire room. It was funny when the main character read it in a book, but 2 weeks have already passed since she woke up in this place. At first, the girl did not understand where she was, or what was wrong with her hair. Memories of her past life began to surface in her head. The maid noticed that she was not feeling well and became worried. Eve is the Emperor's noble daughter, as the maid said. She's glad she remembered it herself. Otherwise, everyone would have thought she'd gone crazy. When Eve met his lordship, she told him that she had long wanted to meet him. He offered to do him the honor of dancing the first dance with him. This guy, Terence Lance, is Ines' hopeless crush. He got engaged to Eve because of her obsessive stalking. In fact, he is the second main character to fall in love with another. He told Eve that she looked like she was going to an execution, not to the dance floor. But Eve might drop dead if he accidentally steps on his foot. But Terence knows that they both need each other. Eve knows that when she is no longer useful, Terence might kill her. He acts polite in public, but she knows what kind of person the Duke is. Such a cold-blooded man plays a couple in love with someone he can't stand. He casually makes fun of Eve as a business partner. In his predator's gaze, she is only a victim. This union gives the main character goosebumps. More than half of the plot has already been revealed. The heroine Sorel is already busy with her own affairs. But everyone who was close to Eve hates her to the depths of their souls. It won't be possible to fix Eve's reputation, because the girl was already reborn in her body like that. The villain Evenus is doomed to a cruel end. In the middle of the novel, on Eve's wedding day, she is killed. And just like that, she disappears from history. The day she woke up in Eve's body, there were 44 days left until the wedding. In her past life, she was an orphan, constantly fighting for her survival. Having finished school with difficulty, the girl finally found a job. And now it is assumed that she will be killed soon. But the heroine will not allow herself to die so tragically in the novel. We are transported back 2 weeks, immediately after the rebirth. Stepmother Eve asked what brought her to the tea party, since she didn't have to come here. Evans replied that her mother herself invited her, and she could not refuse. The princess's stormy temperament becomes stronger every day. Now the princess has become a different person, kind and gentle. The changes began after a serious hunger strike and her illness. Eve didn't want anyone to know about her amnesia, because there would be problems. The maid noticed that Eve had become softer after the amnesia. Evans asked Nell to give her the wrapped tea leaves. Eve presents these tea leaves from the north as a token of gratitude. The presence of the princess makes the meeting seem more radiant, but it would be great if Sorel joined. The outcome of the war is still uncertain, and this is a cause for concern. They continue to discuss Sorel, as if trying to get Eve to go crazy. Sor is the main character of the novel. Everyone praised her powerful healing abilities. Thus, forgotten by all, Eve drowned her resentment by mocking Sorel. They, speaking about Sorel, expect Eve to go berserk, as usual. It seems that the Empress is trying to score at least a few points for herself. Eve asks not to worry about the war, confident that their empire will win. First of all, she needs to ensure her own survival. The enemy nation entrusted command to its youngest prince. Most likely, he won't even get support from his homeland. Everyone was surprised that the princess was so perceptive. The stepmother admitted that it seemed like Eve had done quite a bit of research. There's a month left before the wedding, and the groom hasn't visited yet. Eve realized that even if she behaved smartly, she would still remain pathetic. Terence's aunt asks Eve to talk to the Duke about this. In any case, Eve was hoping to steer the conversation towards the Duke. But there are many couples who become closer after marriage. Eve also heard that the Grand Duke despised mistresses. But Eve believes that they can become a real couple if they try. Eve needs to figure it all out and hear a lot more. She will have to move to the duchy once they get married. Since she won't be able to be in the capital often, she has one request. She wants to visit the temple in advance and pray for His Highness. If Eve pretends to be an obedient daughter, the stepmother will have no choice but to agree. The woman gave Eve her consent to go wherever she wanted. When Eve left, they began to discuss how she had finally grown up. The stepmother guesses that Eve heard that the Grand Duke will be at the temple for the festival. She doesn't believe that Eve, who had never even thought about it before, suddenly decided to pray. But no matter what Eve does, she will still return humiliated. The Enchi festival is a time to honor the souls of the dead. Every year at this time, the temple is visited by Duke Terence. Terence is the only person who can help Eve. In fact, there is nothing special about the temple ritual. To pay respect to the deity, jade beads were left on the altar. The maid almost panicked when she noticed that the princess had no gloves. Eve was obsessed with cleanliness, so she always wore gloves wherever she went. She didn't even leave the house without them. And this was what required treatment. But there is another reason why she forgot to take gloves. It was all about Eve's ghost ability, and the weak power was with the gloves. In the original story, Eve hardly used her ability. She didn't know when the ability would activate, and in fact it was bare hands. She is met by an elderly man who was obliged to greet her. Eve gets to know him, realizing that this is the high priest. She is sure that in his eyes, she is no different from an evil spirit. Eve brings some jewelry that she would like to donate to the temple, and in return for this, she would like to ask for a favor. The priest cannot pluck the sacred flower she needs. Eve became embarrassed and replied that she was probably asking too much. They were horrified that the princess was now in a bad mood. But in the end, the priest agrees and allows her to take the flower. In any case, her infamous reputation came in handy. Now that the flowers are ready, Eve needs to put them in a vase. She suddenly noticed people in the same uniform that the Duke was wearing. It was a stroke of luck for her that they crossed paths like this. And they also say that Terence is the most handsome man on this continent. There is only one person now that Eve can turn to for help. She smiled, saying it was a coincidence to meet here. She prepared a flower from today's tree as a gift. Only 2 people suffered from Eve's death, Eve herself and the Duke. She has no ulterior motive. She just wants to apologize for what happened. To survive in Eve's body, she needs to explain herself to the Duke and ask for help. He asked if she apologized for the incident when she threw a glass sculpture at the man standing in front of him. So he started listing a bunch of situations in which Eve had done something. Terence accepts her apology, but asks her to keep the bouquet for herself. Realizing that he can't let go, Eve asks him to stop. The man was surprised that it was an order and not a request. But if he leaves now, they will both be doomed. Leaving before a lady is a breach of etiquette. Terence can't believe she's giving him a lecture right now. His eyes just say that it is not she, such a stalker, who should teach etiquette. Eve apologizes for offending him, but he doesn't listen to her either. The girl tensed up when Terence suddenly fell silent. He would like to hear how important this conversation is, since she insists so much. Now that Eve has her chance, she can't miss it. She reminds us that in 2 weeks, there will be the anniversary of the late Archduchess. Terence asks what this has to do with her. The Archduchess was Eve's godmother and would soon marry her son. The heroine read about the late Archduchess herself in a novel. She was always kind to her when Eve was little. Whenever she visited the temple hall, she admired the flower garden. So Eve asks Terence to accept the flowers, because his mother won't like it if she goes there herself. Since Her Majesty insists, Terence accepts the flowers. Eve was glad that he agreed and thanked him. Eve doesn't care whether Terence scolds her or thinks she's shameless. She asks him to keep the flowers nearby and take care of them. The girl hopes that Terence will find the note she hid among the petals. It would be better if she remained alive, and the Archduke was not accused of murder by mistake. Before leaving, Aunt Terence finds her. Happy that Eve is still here, Eve remembers that this is the Duchess of Rohan, whom she met at tea. She immediately explained that she did not wear gloves because she was holding a sacred flower in her hands. Of course, Rohan is surprised, because these flowers cannot be picked just like that. The high priest graciously allowed her to take some flowers. Since the funeral was soon to take place, she thought it would be nice to put these flowers on her grave. Rohan thanked Eve because her sister really loved those flowers. She knows that Eve needs to win the Duke's favor. The Duchy of Rohan did not play a major role in the novel. The Duchess appeared occasionally with the Archduke, and the rest of the family were also rarely mentioned. Eve had no friends, and only her sister Diana was by her side. Diana secretly had feelings for Eve's brother, the crown prince. Her condition worsened sharply, which is why she was unable to go to the wedding. If the Duke's daughter is with Eve on her wedding day, she might be able to help her. The maids who were with Eve on the day of her death remained aloof. She was unable to be a bridesmaid due to illness. Rohan says that Diana has been doing better lately and is looking forward to Eve's wedding. Eve remains to find out exactly when Diana's condition worsened. Rohan gives Eve a handkerchief, which is very warm. The main character can't believe that Rohan is so kind to the villain Eve. And as she was about to accept the handkerchief, something began to happen. The girl didn't understand where she ended up, because she had just been in the garden. She suddenly heard the maids asking their mistress to take some medicine. Eve managed to notice that the maids had added something to the water. It seemed that the mistress had become worse, and the maids pretended to be worried. When Eve looked closer, she saw Diana lying in the bed. As she expected, she was the only one who saw it. Eve's unique ability of foresight has been activated. She realized that the girl with brown hair was Diana. Eve suggests to Rohan that they go back because it's getting cold. It most likely wasn't poison, as Diana didn't die in the original. If it weren't for this, Diana would have been the bridesmaid as originally intended. The place that was in the vision was clearly from the Duke's mansion. Suddenly, Eve asks if there is a ball planned at the Duke's estate. Eve lied that she had heard from another lady that they were throwing a ball. In fact, the ball is planned for the evening of Diana's birthday. Nobody liked winter balls, but they can't cancel this annual holiday. Eve decided to ask if His Grace the Duke would be present. He had not attended balls for a long time, but they were insistently asked to take place. Eve asked for an invitation to the ball to thank Diana. Rohan would be honored if Eve attended their event. Eve promises to be quiet so as not to disturb the other guests. Soon, Nell informed Eve that they were approaching the estate, and the girl asked about Diana, what illness she had. Lady Diana suffers from chronic illnesses and rashes, but if she wears a dress, the rash won't be as visible. Eve feels like she's in a survival game. If she doesn't find a way to survive, she will die in this game. Be that as it may, she managed to hand the flowers to the Duke. From this moment on, everything will depend on how much he believes her. But given the way he's behaved before, it's unlikely anything will come of it. But since Eve was very sincere, she will hope for the best. The other maids also noticed that Eve had changed a lot. That night, Eve meets Terence, who says that he has been waiting for her for a long time. He was seriously offended that the girl was 2 minutes late. But it took Eve some time to get here unnoticed. She asked to meet Terence because she had something important to say. But, having received such a shocking note, Terence expected something similar. He didn't expect that Eve might know anything about the lost relic. This relic is a sword, one of the 5 sacred relics of the Empire. But Eve knows where this sword is because she read the novel. Terence is curious how she could know about this. It seemed to her that he was more interested in the location of the rest of the sword. That's why Eve says Terence should help her. Suddenly, the girl declares that she will be killed on her wedding day. And he adds that it is Terence who will be accused of this crime. Terence knew that Eve was a self-centered person, but she still dared to lie to him. But Eve denies her lies and that she is not crazy. She saw a future in which the Emperor would kill him with divine power. Terence heard that Eve lost her gift as a child. Eve thought so too. But suddenly, her gift returned after their engagement. Thus, Eve saw a future in which it became clear where the relic was hidden. Terence asks why she doesn't announce the return of her powers, and it bothers him that she tells him about it so calmly. If Eve doesn't prove she can be useful, Terence won't help her. If she reveals the Emperor's plans, the Duke will definitely let her die. Terence may eliminate the Emperor and Eve herself to protect himself. She promises to help Terence if he helps her. Terence remembers that she said she could see into the future of marriage. He asked for evidence, and Eve replied that he would know in 5 days. He asks her to tell him what he will wear to the wedding if she really has the gift. Before this, the butler was going to prepare a suit for the wedding. But this time, Terence decided to wear a black ceremonial mantra. He said it yesterday morning, and now, in theory, Eve should say it. And the heroine said that he would be in the mantra at the wedding. To fully trust her, Terence asks what he will do tonight. The downside is that such events are not described in the novel. That's why Eve said that such things are not something she can see on command. Terence doesn't understand what this power is that can't be controlled. So Eve had no choice but to check now. The The girl asked if she could hold Terrence's hand. She immediately explained that she needed direct contact to use her power. When the Duke agreed, Eve could only hope that everything would work out. When she opened her eyes, she realized that everything had worked out, and now she needs to come back with solid evidence as soon as possible. When she returned, Terrence asked what she saw. Eve said that in his hand, he was holding a deck of cards with certain suits. Recently, his estate has been preparing to expand into the southern region, and in times like these, he has no time for cards or games. Eve asks him not to leave, promising that this is definitely true. Terrence eventually agrees to trust her until tomorrow morning, and after this, the girl had to return to the palace. But suddenly, Terrence grabbed her hand, pulling her towards him. The man hugs Eve when he heard the sounds. She asked what was wrong, but Terrence asked her to be quiet. At this moment, the novel's protagonist, Michael Sheldon, appears. He is the second in command of the Royal Knights. Eve is indignant that Mikhail could have ended up here. Hearing the sound of heels, the man becomes wary and asks them to leave. Terrence suddenly asks the princess to close her eyes for a minute. She almost screamed when he began to draw his sword. Thus, Michael heard her voice and realized that it was the princess. He asked what she was doing there and who that person was next to her. Terrence says that Michael should start by apologizing for interrupting a personal meeting. Mikhail felt awkward, so he immediately apologized. Eve also asks him to keep what he saw today a secret. And then the girl will also keep the secret of the third brick. The third brick is in the center of the left stone wall in the northern storage room. It is there that Mikhail and Sorel exchange letters. It was their secret, and Eve had to use it as a trump card. Terrence said that if the truth came out, he would be in trouble. Mikhail swore on his honor to remain silent about what he had seen. Eve thanked him, and after that, Mikhail left. Terrence is not surprised that Eve knows even Mikhail's weakness. But Eve just wanted to clarify that today's incident should not be leaked to society. Terrence thought that Eve was afraid that he might kill Mikhail. He intended to hit him lightly with the blade to make him lose consciousness. Eve can't believe that this man is Mikhail's half-brother. Michael was born through a former archduke and a servant. Michael's mother, being a servant, was abandoned by the archduke. In the original novel, Duke Terrence is aware of this fact. From Terrence's point of view, Michael is to blame, but in reality this is not the case. They can't risk anyone else noticing them together. At this stage, they say goodbye, although they will see each other soon anyway. At home, Terrence wondered who would be playing cards at such a time. But Eve didn't look like she was going to deceive him. Even if her words are false, he had better investigate. When he came out, he bumped into his brother Lot. Lot says that he played cards with Mr. Camion. Camion apologized because he thought Lot was bored. Lot asked if his brother could join them. He insists that they play again. Terrence eventually agrees, but only once. Lot wants to show the model to the princess he is preparing for the wedding. And come to think of it, Terrence hasn't thrown out those flowers yet. He himself doesn't understand why he can't throw them away. Terrence is confident that Lot will like Eve's gift because he tried so hard. After a long game, they decide to call it a day because it's getting late. Camion returns to work, and Terrence thanks him. The cards in his hands turned out to be of the same suits that Eve had spoken about. Thus, 5 days have already passed, which Eve asked to wait. Dvoretsky studied the solar eclipse and concluded that it would not occur in the near future. The emperor also showed no suspicious activity. The emperor offered a payment for consent to this marriage, and if it weren't for this condition, Terrence would never have agreed to this marriage. Eve said that this was all a trap set by the emperor. Terrence still thought it was just a coincidence, and at that very moment, the butler notices an eclipse that should not have happened. Even the observatory confirmed that there will definitely not be a solar eclipse. It turns out that everything the princess said is true. The Duke asks Camion to prepare the horses immediately. When he asks where he is going, Terrence says to the temple. Eve also noticed that the eclipse had begun, and all that was left was to wait for an invitation. There are 35 days left until the wedding. The message should arrive soon. The maid noticed that the princess continued to sigh heavily. What's more important to Eve is that she's had enough embroidery for today. The main character treats the maid to cookies, and she thanks her. Eve apologized for holding her hands for so long, but she replied that her hands were warm. Since Eve held people's hands, she had only seen a vision once. It was much worse than she thought, and at this rate, she would be thrown out. The maid suddenly informs her that the high priest has sent her an invitation. When the girl arrived, the priest thanked her for it. He also thanks her for her generous donation last time. He called her to talk about how the proceeds from the sale of the jewelry were being used. Eve walks with him and asks Nell to wait for her a little. She was genuinely surprised when Duke Terence met them. It couldn't be that the priest, who was so afraid of her, called her himself. When they were alone, Eve asked Terence if he believed her now. Terence asks if anything she said back then was a lie. Eve answers honestly and seriously that she didn't lie about anything. Terence narrowly escaped disaster thanks to this. He does not understand whether the Emperor could have set him up by sacrificing his own daughter. It's hard to believe that he could resort to such cruelty. Thus he realized that the Emperor was truly ruthless. Terence also promises to help Eve if she helps him. He means that he will take care of her safety. The main character thanked him for this with all her heart. Terence didn't know that the princess was always so emotional. They must make sure that their wedding goes off without a single problem. From now on, even the Emperor's influence will be limited. Eve asks him not to worry about the wedding, guaranteeing safety. She promises to file for divorce as soon as Terence is safe. Eve states that she prefers to live alone in a quiet place. But even after the divorce, she promises to use her powers for Terence. But just a few days ago, she was screaming that she would die if they didn't get married. Yet Eve is not one to be easily caught off guard. She promises to get rid of her feelings for Terence completely. She was indeed in love with him, but she had other reasons for marrying him. She believed that marriage would bring peace between their empires. Now they think that Eve, having become a mediator, was abandoned by her father. Terence reasons that her wish would have come true if the Emperor had been smarter. He asks again if Eve really wants a divorce when the time comes. Terence asked her if she had any information about the plot at their wedding. All Eve knows is that she will die on her wedding day. Her ability can only show a short scene, nothing more. It suddenly occurred to her that murder attempts could happen on other days too. Eve remembered that the Emperor had tried to kill her a few days before their wedding. The death on her wedding day was such a shock that Eve forgot about it. Terence would like to help, but has no idea how to do it. As a result, the man invites her to stay close to him. They need to stick together so that Eve can foresee his future. Acting like lovers will be the easiest way to avoid accusations. But Eve knows that Terence has no acting talent whatsoever. In the original, he pretended to have a relationship with Sorel, and this was done only to hide the relationship between Sorel and Mikhail. It's impossible that Terence, who couldn't stand Eve, would suddenly fall in love with her. So she tells him that there may be even more suspicions. Terence heard that Eve had become kind to others. He doesn't know if it will be strange that he will feel sympathy for her. But people believe what they see, even if they have suspicions. Given the events, there is no reason to pretend that he is falling in love. Even if they suspect him, they will wonder what benefit they can get from him. If they pretend to be lovers, Eve will be able to stay at Terence's estate. Eventually, Eve agrees to his proposal. She invites him to go to the Empress's ball together, and she asked not to worry about the offer, because there is a way. But besides this, the girl wants to ask him for one more favor. Eve is too tired today. She wants to take a bath and lie down. The urgent matters are finished, and she can finally rest. But suddenly, the maid announced that the crown prince had returned to the capital. He hasn't even met his sister Eve. It's obvious he hates her. But this is not surprising, because Eve was always getting into trouble. From his serious face, she concludes that he and Eve are very similar. He decided to throw formalities aside and get straight to the point. Eve pulls herself together and says she wants a wedding present. The prince hopes that his grace will not be present there. He'll be there, but Eve says she's not going there because of him. In fact, the girl wants to meet Lady Diana. Eve wants to thank Diana for agreeing to be her bridesmaid. Since the Duchess personally invited her, Eve is afraid that she will be disappointed if she does not come. She remembers that the Empress asked His Highness to be kinder to her. The prince asks why she doesn't ask the Empress herself then. Eve suddenly announces that she thinks her relationship with Terence will improve. The prince thinks that Eve is very upset about her mother's recent death, and the crown prince probably hates her more than he does. He realized that Eve was studying to become a duchess in the future. She studied the history of the Archduke's family and the empire. When the prince asked her a question to test her, Eve answered easily. Eve spent her free time reading books in the library. The prince agreed to tell the Empress that Eve would be at the ball in his place. He also asked her to contact him if she needed anything for the wedding. In the original, The prince didn't care about Eve at all. In the corridor, she is met by a maid who has already prepared a bath for her. She also reported that a new maid had arrived. She introduces herself as Chloe, starting work today. This is the maid Terrence was talking about. In this way, he ensured Eve's safety until the wedding. A maid can be useful in many ways. A few days later, Eve is worried that she will screw up during the dance. Nell supports her, reminding her that she has been training for several days. If it comes to other dances, Eve might be left outside the ballroom. It is also very important to her how Diana feels today. If possible, Eve wants to protect Diana. Rohan meets them, and Eve thanks her for the invitation. She is also met by Diana, who is very honored to see her. Eve brought Diana a gift for agreeing to be a bridesmaid. Diana invites her to look at the dress she is going to wear. Afterwards, Diana gave a tour of the estate. Eve looked carefully at the maids to find the one from her vision. But in such a huge mansion, there are more than 10 maids. Eve doesn't know how to find that maid and stop her. Next, Diana shows her the music room. Eve wondered if there was such a room in the palace. Diana tells how the crown prince was here before. He came into this room for a minute while Diana was playing. She will never forget the day they exchanged greetings. Eve can't believe that Diana has feelings for her brother. Eve thinks that Diana fell in love with him because there were no other men around. Diana wondered if His Highness the Prince remembered her. Eve doesn't want to hurt her, so she answers yes. She could keep an eye out to see if anyone would sneak into Diana's room. So she asks what time Diana takes her medication. It turned out that it was about the time the ball ended. Diana would also like to attend the ball, but she is upset. Most of the evening dresses exposed skin, and Diana felt self-conscious. Deciding to change the subject, Eve asks where her dress is. Diana suggests going and looking at it right now. Diana's room turned out to be very nice in Eve's opinion, but when she saw her dress, she thought it was too simple. Eve thinks the Duchess recommended the dress because of her. Eve suggests adding some embellishments to the dress, and the girl invites Diana to choose what she likes. She also asks if Diana would like to open her gift now. There was a beautiful necklace inside, and Diana thanks her for the gift. Eve is sad that Diana can't go to the ball because of her rash. Down below, Diana also wants to show Eve a lot of things. The heroine notices the Duchess's relatives talking nearby. They discuss how, in the Duke's absence, the Duchess was able to cope on her own. They whisper that Diana won't be able to attend the ball anyway. Eve realized they were mocking Diana by pretending to be concerned, and she won't let this all be left to chance. Eve approaches the guests, attracting their attention, and greets them. She specifically says that she doesn't remember them. She only read up to the 3rd chapter of the Heraldic Register. The 1st chapter of the book lists the imperial and royal families. The 2nd chapter contains families that once ruled independent nations. The 3rd chapter lists the dukes and marquises. In other words, all these people look the same to her. They say hesitantly that they are related to Rohan. Eve assumed they were of low class, since they were criticizing their master. Next time, they should be more careful in their statements. Eve plans to relax here and invites them to join her. She is sure that Diana is also tired and suggests that she rest. Eve asks to keep what just happened a secret from her mother. So Eve managed to put these fools in their place. The butler tells Terrence that there was no danger in the southern area. He thinks that these words were exaggerated, and that this is the work of the emperor. Carmion doesn't understand why His Majesty needs to do all this. Suddenly, Terrence asks him who people would suspect first if the princess were killed. Carmion, horrified, asks if he is going to kill the princess. He wonders why Terrence is suddenly asking this. But he asks if there was any news from the princess today. 5 days had passed since their last meeting at the temple. He wondered if she had been lying when she said she had fallen out of love with him. For some reason, her words about divorce hurt the Duke too much. Carmion asks why Terrence took so many nights with him. He replied that he was simply asked for a favor. Eve wants the maid to get the key to the music room from the Duchess. Eve asks to use it to unlock the door. Although the maid was not sure, she agreed to do it. First, Eve will leave the ballroom and head to the music room. She will then follow the maid as she enters Diana's room. And after that, she will rush inside and stop the maid. Later, the maid informs her that the reception room is ready. There was a tradition for guests to spend time in the reception hall. They apologize for not being able to greet Eve properly. Eve told them that she hadn't planned to come and had come here in her brother's place. She's sure they think she's crazy. Later, the visiting Terrence is met by his aunt. She gives him the information that Eve is here too, in case he didn't know. He asks her not to worry, that everything will be okay. It looks like the third dance is about to begin, and his aunt invites him inside. Terrence is asked how his preparation is going. Terrence knows they're all deliberately avoiding the topic of marriage. It's probably all because of his behavior in the presence of the princess. The next dance begins, and he needs to find the princess. But he didn't have to look for long, because she came to him herself. When they met, he asked her if everything was okay. Smiling, the girl asks if that's all he wanted to tell her. Terrence gets down on one knee and asks the princess to dance with her. Eve agrees without hesitation and takes his hand. Terrence noted that the princess looked thinner. She mentioned that she loves to dance, but now she doesn't seem to enjoy it. Terrence doesn't understand why he suddenly thought about this, but he thinks that all this can affect her abilities. He squeezed her hand too hard and apologized for it. The girl blushed visibly because Terrence was too good-looking. After the dance ended, she noticed that everyone was looking somewhere, and suddenly her brother, the crown prince, appears at the ball. The prince previously said he was too busy with work. Rohan apologized to him because they didn't expect him to come, but he thinks that it is his fault that he arrived late. It would be indecent to send his sister alone to the ball where he was invited. Eve and Terrence approach them, and the latter greets him. Seeing the two of them getting along was a pleasant sight for the prince. Terrence said it was natural for them since they were engaged. Eve remembers that in the novel, Terrence played his role poorly, but now the man looks quite natural. Terrence asks the prince if he can take the princess for a while. He would like to discuss the upcoming wedding with Eve. Eve notices how her brother is clearly nervous and stumbling over his words. Rohan is genuinely happy to see that the two are close. Terrence kisses Eve's wrist, saying he was wrong to think ill of her. The girl did not expect this at all, so she was noticeably embarrassed. She is sweating heavily, and Terrence suggests that she take a break. Eve brushed it off by saying that she hadn't danced for a long time and was therefore tired. Terrence later says that this is definitely enough for today. Eve is also confident that they definitely made the right impression. She doesn't understand how someone can change so drastically in one moment. Terrence mentioned that he came here with a sufficient number of knights. Now the ducal house has little power left due to the war. That's why Eve asked for the knights to be brought, because she was worried. She tells Terrence that she has not yet had time to find out the maid's identity. She may hide and wait for the right moment to act. They should wait until the maid goes into Diana's room. Terrence asks if the crown prince knows that Eve is in danger. She replied that he didn't know and asked why he was asking. Terrence is just curious why she turned to him for help. In fact, it's because in the original story, it's Terrence who wins. Right now, Brother Eve doesn't have the strength to resist the Emperor. Besides, she doesn't think he really wants to protect her. In the original, the crown prince did not mourn the death of his sister. Now Eve understands that even in this life, she was unlucky with her family. Her birth family in another world died when she was little. It all ended with her simply being sent to an orphanage. Noticing that the girl was cold, Terrence threw his robe over her shoulders. The man also asks to be called Terrence, not Duke. It would be strange if the groom behaved like this. And when Eve called his name, she noticed that he was still serious. In a moment of silence, they heard footsteps outside the door. When they looked outside, they noticed the maid entering Diana's room. Realizing that the moment has come, Eve bursts into her room and asks Diana not to drink what is in the glass. Diana, seeing the two of them, does not understand what is happening. Pointing to the maid, Eve claims that she mixed something in, but the maid indignantly asked why she would do such a thing. Eve is sure that the woman is just pretending to save herself. At that moment, knights summoned by Terrence burst into the room. Eve asks them to check the maid's sleeves, because she saw her hide something there. Terrence tells them to do as the princess says. A small bottle was indeed found in the maid's sleeve. As soon as Terrence smelled the contents, he immediately realized what it was. He asks the knights to bring Rohan here immediately and tell them that Diana has been attacked. Terrence tells Eve that the medicine turned out to be a common fever reducer. This medicine is like poison to Diana, because she is sensitive to herbs. By doing this, they tried to make her illness worse, and no one would notice. Rohan runs into the room in a panic, worried about her daughter. Diana calms her mother, telling her that everything is fine. Rohan asks in horror what happened here. Terrence reports that a fever reducer was found in the maid's sleeve. Rohan is shocked to report that even that is forbidden. She asks the maid who ordered her to do this. The maid admitted that Baron Moselle forced her to do it. Diana says that this is a relative whom they saw in the evening. Rohan knows that if Diana dies, Mosul will inherit the title. He heard that Diana's health had recently worsened, so he decided to make things worse. Rohan orders the maid to be locked in the basement and the Baron to be quietly detained. Rohan thanks Terence and Eve for their help. They managed to avoid tragedy. Terence decides to ask if they check what Diana eats. She replied that until now, they had only checked for the presence of poison. Terence apologizes to the princess that he needs to step away for a minute. Eve gives Rohan a poison detection crystal, which will be able to detect most drugs. It was a very precious thing for Rohan. It was hard for her to accept. Since Eve has another such stone, she gives this one to Rohan. Diana cries, because on a day when everyone should be happy, everything was ruined because of her. The mother tries to calm her down, assuring her that it is not her fault. Eve doesn't know if there is a definitive way to cure Diana. She thought she could use the power to see the future. But when she touched Diana, she saw nothing. And then her eyes suddenly went dark, and she was transported into a vision. The main character sees the Duchess, who for some reason is crying. She said they had just found a cure, but this happened. Eve doesn't understand why the atmosphere is so gloomy if the cure has been found. But they ask her not to blame herself, because no one expected Diana to die. This is how Eve realized that the young Duchess had died after all. Eve hopes he can figure out how to improve the drug. She noticed the Duchess's dress, which looked lighter. This means that the time of year in the prophecy was summer, but Eve doesn't know if it will be in a year or two. Soon her vision began to slowly fade. When she returned, Diana asked if everything was okay. Eve realized she might look suspicious. She doesn't want to stand by and watch Diana die. The vision did indeed indicate that there was no cure. Eve invites Diana to visit her palace sometime, but Diana didn't even make her debut in social circles. If she helps with wedding preparations, no one will ask questions. Eve hopes that Diana will help her with the design for the dress. This way, she will be able to see Diana more often and see visions. Eve is going to use everything she has to find a cure. Diana agrees, and Eve looks forward to her visit. Thanks to Eve, Terence is able to save his cousin. The girl did not expect sudden gratitude from him. Her abilities turned out to be more useful than he imagined. Rohan also doesn't know how to thank Eve for what she did. She thinks she's been misjudging Eve all this time. The heroine realizes that Eve really did pose a threat. Terence would like to keep their involvement in this a secret. If this were to become known, it could put the duchy in a difficult position. Rohan promises to stop by later to properly express his gratitude. Terence stays here to take care of business, but Eve needs to go. The man also hopes that they will see each other soon. Before leaving, Eve is unexpectedly found by her brother. The prince invites Eve to return to the palace together before it gets dark. The girl is sure that he is going to ask her about Terence. She didn't have time to answer because her brother was distracted. He was informed that the Duchess wished to speak with him. She must want to talk about the Baron's punishment. In this country, to punish a nobleman, the Emperor's consent is required. But in the absence of the Emperor, only Arentinus can give consent. The next morning, the maids are already taking care of the awakened Eve. The maids seem much more polite than they used to be. Eve noticed that one of the maids was nervous and asked what was wrong. She asked if it was true that Eve had met with the Duke yesterday. When Eve confirmed this, the maid asked if it was true that he had confessed his love to Eve. Eve didn't expect the rumors to be so exaggerated. Later, the maid reported that the Empress was calling Eve. When Eve arrived, she asked if she had enjoyed the ball. The Empress heard rumors that Eve begged the Duke to be her cavalier at the ball. Eve doesn't understand who could say such a thing, because everything was not like that. Last night, Terence himself asked her to dance, and it is quite natural to dance with your groom. The Empress asks her not to behave so rudely, even if she is going to win his heart. But Eve simply handed the flowers to his lordship, and the Duke accepted them. The woman suggested that he accepted them because of the mention of his mother. She struggles to understand why Terence is kind to Eve. The Empress asks what Eve thinks about refraining from leaving the palace. She reminds Eve that her probationary period is not over. She doesn't want Eve to cause trouble for the Duke if she goes to see him. Eve realized that she was afraid that the Emperor would be angry with her for keeping her locked up. The Empress thinks that it is enough for Eve to go out in public, and she is sure that the Duke himself would have offered her to stay in the palace. Eve says she's right, even though she doesn't really think so. Therefore, the girl declares that she would like to live in a monastery. She thought it would be better if she prayed until the wedding. Eve knows that her former relatives also lived in a monastery before their marriage. My great-aunt was locked in a monastery because her mother was executed as a criminal. It is said that the princesses who lived there purified their bodies. But the Empress doesn't know how Eve imagines life there. Eve thinks it would be great to live a quiet life before marriage. She asked what people would think when they heard that she had left on the advice of the Empress. They won't like it. They'll think she's locked in there. The Empress wants to think about this issue some more, and Eve asked if she could meet the Duke tomorrow. The Empress angrily asked if she was blackmailing her now. If she refuses her, Eve will go to a monastery, and the Empress cannot allow this. So Eve feigns that she has no idea what kind of blackmail they're talking about. A maid came in and announced that a wedding present had arrived for Her Highness. Eve remembers that she and the Duke parted only 12 hours ago. She forced a smile on her face, asking if it was really a gift from the Duke. So now Eve can definitely go and see her fiancé. Since the Duke himself asked, the Empress should let her go. The heroine is confident that the Empress will report this to the Emperor. But until then, Eve can rest for about a week. A maid meets her and asks her to follow her. She urgently asks the girl to look out the window and see what's there. It took several carriages to bring the Duke's gifts. Eve knew that there was a tradition here of giving bouquets as gifts. One of the maids says that these are Rostan's flowers. As it turns out, these flowers symbolize love. They are worried about where to store all this, because the flowers might freeze. In the end, they decided to decorate the palace with them and make a fragrant mixture from the rest. Terence sent not only flowers, but also jewelry. Eve can't even believe that she can actually accept all of this. She suggests taking everything they can use now and the rest later. Each of the items looks luxurious and absurdly expensive. In one box, she found a stone similar to the original holy relic. In the original, Sorel discovered it on the battlefield, thinking it was just a beautiful crystal. But the moment she reached out to him, the divine beast awakened. But the original relic was clearly not that small. Eve asks Nell to call the knight who delivered the gifts. She asks him where Terence got this necklace. This decoration is a family heirloom, passed down through generations. Eve wondered if she would have to take him back if they got divorced. She wonders if this stone has any special features. But the knight, unfortunately, had never heard of such a thing. But there is nothing strange in the existence of such precious stones. Eve asks the knight to convey her gratitude to the Duke. A few days later, the maids noticed Nell going somewhere. She wants to bring some oils to the princess's room. Later, they discuss how they used to be afraid of Eve, but now they like her. In the end, Eve marries the Duke, which is what she always wanted. Due to the last hunger strike, Eve lost her memory so much that she did not remember herself. Since then, she smiles, doesn't make a fuss, and walks without gloves. At first, Nell was worried about it, but now everyone adores the princess. Now she definitely had to go, as Eve had left the living room. On the stairs, Nell meets a maid named Lana. She appears to trip her, and Nell falls on the stairs. The vase containing perfume oil broke, and it started leaking. Lana said that this bottle was very important to Her Highness. But Nell saw that Lana had deliberately tripped her up. The other maids heard their quarrel and came out to see. Lana doesn't understand how Eve can keep such a clumsy person around. But in fact, Eve saw all this when she was standing on the floor above. Eve immediately runs up to Nell, asking if she's okay. The maid Chloe also saw how Lana tripped Nell. So Eve asks Lana what excuse she's going to come up with. Lana immediately falls to her knees, admitting her guilt to Eve. Eve says she owes Nell an apology. Lana asks for forgiveness in tears, saying that it was her envy. As much as Nell doesn't want to, she forgives Lana. In fact, this morning, when Nell touched Eve, she saw this vision. Eve leaves first, inviting Nell to join her when she feels better. The other maids decide to help Eve dress up for her meeting with Terence. Eve noticed a cut on Nell's hand and asked what happened. Nell assumed she had scratched herself when she fell that time. Eve asks to bring ointment because it might leave a scar. Eve asks Nell to try not to get her hand wet for a while. Nell finally smiled and thanked the princess. After some time, the main character arrives at the tea garden. It's warm here, unlike outside, due to the temperature control spell. His lordship meets her and asks if she likes it here. Eve admits that it is very beautiful and cozy here. He offers Eve the garden as a gift from him. He admits that he has 3 exactly the same gardens. And if she liked the garden, then Terence would give it to her. But Eve makes excuses that she doesn't even know how to take care of such a place. Terrence believes that wedding gifts and this are different. Eve decides to ask him if he remembers the wedding gift. A necklace. She says she heard it was a family heirloom. Eve asked if this decoration was related to the divine beast, but Terrence said he had never heard anything like that. Suddenly, it seemed that friends of the Duke's family came to them. One of them said it was unexpected to see them together. Eve realizes they need to show that she and Terrence are close. Terrence said he wanted to show Eve the garden, so he personally invited her here. The girl was slightly embarrassed, not expecting him to take her hand. They immediately understood everything and decided to leave so as not to disturb them. It was unexpected, but it's good that they didn't get confused. Terrence realized that to see a vision, one had to touch. Eve replied that she absolutely couldn't run around grabbing everyone's hands. Terrence takes her hand again and offers to try. She doesn't understand whether he's serious or just making fun of her. In the end, Eve said, embarrassed, that she couldn't see anything. Terrence assumed it was because nothing interesting had happened to him lately. Eve decided to mention that Terrence was quite good at acting. She thought he might be nervous because he was attracted to Sorrel, but Terrence told Eve that she played terribly. The girl did not expect such words, not thinking that everything was so bad. For Terrence, Eve looks a little awkward, and she could have acted better. The man openly criticizes the main character now. In the novel, he said that he never acted like he was in love with someone. In the end, Eve uses his own words and answers him in the same way. Terrence suggested that Eve might have spent a similar youth. Eve thinks she said something wrong, looking at his face. The Duke's father was a womanizer, and his biological mother died early. It seemed to her that this phrase directly concerned his past. Eve decides to change the subject by asking if they will be staying only here today. Terrence wanted to show her the estate, but it was not ready yet because there was no furniture. He tells the girl that she will be able to see everything in 3 days. So the man invites her to visit him, and she agrees. Eve suddenly remembered that the Duke's younger brother was also on this estate, so she decides to ask if she can meet him. Since they will be living together in the estate, it is obvious that they will see each other. Besides, he had long wanted to meet the princess. Eve realizes that there is now trust between them. She should go to the store and prepare a gift for his brother. A gift is the best way to win a child's heart. Terrence agrees to go with the heroine to get a gift. Soon the Empress received a message from His Majesty. In the message, he asked to postpone the princess's wedding. Nobody knows why he suddenly gave such an order, but the Empress thinks it would be better if Eve marries the Duke. The late Empress was a princess of another country who grew up in great love, but after she married the Emperor, she lived a lonely life. After that, His Majesty loved not her, but the Empress. She eventually died, perhaps due to her emotional confessions. At the ball, the princess and the Duke danced sweetly. He even sent her gifts. However, she cannot understand why the Duke went so far. If Eve marries someone from another family, the Duke's power could greatly increase. The Empress does not understand how he dares to order her to do such a thing. She is informed that Princess Eve has been unwell until recently, but no one knows whether she managed to fully recover. Now the Empress understands that the exit is right under her nose. If Eve gets sick, the wedding will have to be postponed. Soon Eve came to the Duke, and he met her at the gate. The man introduces his younger brother Lot to the girl. The main character was very happy to meet Lot. She brought him a gift and asked if he wanted to see it. Since Lot wants to become an admiral, she gave him a replica of a warship. The boy was clearly delighted with this gift and thanked Eve. Lot admits that he also has an unfinished gift. Eve wanted to take a look, and Lot invited her to go to his room. The gift turned out to be dolls in the form of Eve and Terrence. For a child, this is done in quite a lot of detail, which surprises Eve. Lot admits that he asked the knights to describe her appearance in order to make a doll of her, and they replied that she always looks angry, and her gaze is piercing, like a monster's, that her hair sticks out in all directions, and sometimes resembles snakes. Eve didn't expect the knights of the great house to see her like this, but Lot made this doll based on what Terrence told him. Eve is genuinely surprised, because she thought Terrence would describe her in the worst possible light. Lot thinks it's a pointless gift, but Eve really likes it. He was delighted by this and promised to finish the gift before the wedding. Eve said with anticipation that she can't wait to see the finished result. After this, the girl says goodbye to Terrence's brother and leaves. Lot turned out to be much kinder and warmer than she expected. Eve was shown her room, and it looks incredibly luxurious. The maid asks to let them know if something doesn't suit her, This room is larger than any other room in the palace. Eve decides to ask where the Grand Duke is now. The maids reply that he was in the northern garden. Lot heard that there had been an attack and attempted murder. They all gathered to hold the funeral of Terrence's mother. Terrence later met with Eve, asking if she had looked at her room. Terrence actually placed the flowers she gave him on the grave. Yesterday was the anniversary of the death of the late Duchess. Terrence has looked into the situation in the south, and he won't have to be there in person. The Emperor exaggerated everything to distract the Duke's attention. But even more importantly, there is new information. Sir Garin met with the Empress. Judging by the circumstances, the message came from the Emperor. But even if rumors spread, they would not dare harm the princess. And even if she is killed, it will be difficult to blame the Duke for it. Ave thinks the Emperor has a plan to lure her and Terrence into a trap. She needs to figure this out before anything happens. The maid who was combing her hair accidentally hurt her. Eve recognized the face of this maid as that very same Lena. Thanks to the head maid's forgiveness, Lena returned to work. Eve asks to give her comb and go out, because that is enough. And when their hands touch, the girl is transported into a vision. The place in her vision looks very much like a warehouse or basement. Lana told someone that she added it little by little so that no one would notice. Recognizing Lana in this head, Eve thinks that she will try to harm Nell again. Lana became scared as soon as the princess started screaming after she swallowed him. Lana was worried that the princess would die because of this potion. But this remedy does not pose a lethal threat, and the Empress gave it to the maid. Immediately after these words, the heroine returned to reality. According to the vision, Lana will add a potion to her food, and it will cause a headache. And it is likely that this potion was prepared by the Empress. She wants to postpone the wedding to plan the murder. They are trying to make her look sick, because that way the wedding will be postponed. So, the main character thinks that Lana should be exiled to another palace. Soon, Eve asked Nell to call Sir Sheldon here. Yesterday, she invited him to meet Eve today. And soon, as expected, Michael Sheldon arrived. When he sat down at the table, he asked why she was looking for him. Eve gets straight to the point, giving him the necklace in exchange for which he will do her a favor. Mikhail, confused, asks where she got it from. Eve, smiling falsely, replied that she had found it again. This necklace is a Sorrel family heirloom. Eve, who hated Sorrel, threw the necklace straight into the pond. Then she gave orders to the servants to find it, and now Eve can use this necklace. The man cautiously asks Eve what she wants. Then Eve says that one of her maids has a suspicious potion. The girl puts forward her thoughts that she is trying to poison her. Eve knows who she is. But that's how the most important evidence goes missing. That's why Eve wants Michael to bring the knights when needed. He agreed without hesitation, because it was his duty to protect the princess. Eve asks to keep it all a secret until she tells him. At that moment, Terrence appeared here, having come earlier than Eve had asked. Terrence can't bear to let his fiancée wait for him. As soon as he cast a sharp glance at Mikhail, he announced that he was leaving. Eve tells Terrence that she had something to ask Sir Sheldon for. In fact, Eve also has a request for Terrence. She asks Terrence if he still has the Arcanium crystal. Terrence offers to make a deal with her if she wants the crystal. In exchange for the crystal, he asks Eve to tell him Mikhail's weakness. She thought he meant the secret of the third brick. But Eve is not going to tell him because this is Mikhail and Sorrel's weakness. The main hero and heroine develop romantic feelings for each other, and they cannot be stopped. In the end, she asks Terrence not to worry about it, that she will find a way herself. She noticed his serious expression, as if he was eager to know Mikhail's weakness. In the original story, Terrence never tried to destroy Michael. Terrence concluded that Sir Sheldon's case seemed to be truly important, but this is not the information that will help him himself. Eve mentions that she is keeping his secret, not because she has feelings for him. But then Terrence asks why she needs the crystal. She needs the crystal to avoid the potion's effects. Besides this, she is going to pretend to be sick. If she doesn't feel bad, she will be able to catch Lana and her accomplice. But if Eve gets sick, they will meet in the warehouse, as in the vision. It's more effective to pretend to have fallen into their trap while you build your own. Terrence will send the crystal to Eve through the maid, as before. Terrence asks her to take care of herself, because she promised to help him. With the help of the crystal, Eve will be able to detect the potion. Unexpectedly, Lady Diana comes to the princess. Diana noticed that Eve was embroidering a veil, but she was still practicing. Diana offers Eve to teach her to embroider. At least simple things. After several attempts, they managed to embroider a flower. Eve thought that everyone in this family had some handicraft skills, and Terence did too. She can only imagine Terence breaking everything around him. Suddenly, Diana asks if Eve has thought about a wedding dress. Diana can sketch out a dress, and the tailor can use it as a reference. That's why Diana suggests trying to draw today. Diana suggests adding some embellishments to the drawing. When they added embellishments to the design, the dress looked more beautiful. Eve would like to keep this option that Diana suggested. The maid unexpectedly announces that the crown prince has arrived. Diana was noticeably embarrassed and confused at the sight of the prince. Eve suddenly realized that Arentine didn't know about Diana's identity, so she immediately says that she came here because the lady of this house, Diana, helped her with her wedding dress. Arentine hasn't seen Diana for a long time, and he is glad that she is in full health. The trouble had passed, but for some reason, Diana still had a strange look on her face. At this point, Diana said that she would step away for a moment. Eve knows she's bad at embroidery, so she asks Argentina not to force himself to compliment her. He says he will return to the battlefield, but it will happen before her wedding. Eve agrees with him and asks him not to worry about her. In the original story, Arentine couldn't return until Eve's wedding. During this time, Lana served tea 4 times, but the crystal did not work even once. So the girl wondered at what exact moment she was going to serve the potion. Arentine thought that Eve was worried about Terence's problems. Eve thought that was why he had come, to assess their relationship. He reminds her that Terence is a dangerous man, even though he knows Eve likes him. And if something happens, Arentine asks her to contact him. Eve remembers that in the original, Arentine absolutely hated her. He apologized for arriving unannounced, and now he had to go. In fact, Diana is embarrassed to appear like this, but Eve supports her that she looks pretty good. Knowing that Diana might be in pain, Eve didn't say anything else. Diana smiled sincerely and thanked Eve. However, she wondered why, of all people, she liked Arentine. Soon the maid Lana arrived and brought tea. Eve's hand shakes as she takes the cup, thinking it contains a potion. Before that, she asks Lana to prepare a bath for her. Then, the girl takes out that same crystal and throws it into the cup. As expected, there was a potion mixed into this tea. Now, according to the plan, the heroine must pretend to be ill. Over the next few days, the maids discussed Eve's illness. They think they should call a doctor, because it could be something terrible. Lana couldn't take it anymore and yelled at them to get to work. Lana doesn't understand why the princess doesn't call a doctor, because she could die that way. Then, that same dialogue between Lana and her accomplice from Eve's vision happened. The accomplice assures that Eve's life is not in any serious danger. She will pay her in advance, and Lana must leave before the wedding. Just as they were about to leave, Mikhail suddenly burst into the storage room. Later, Michael informed the princess that they had arrested them after the meeting. The main character understands that everything is going according to plan, as it should. Their arrest was easy because Eve knew the meeting place. She asked Mikhail if he found out who the woman was with Lana was. And suddenly, he says that she turned out to be the Empress's personal maid. Eve didn't expect at all that the Empress could send her maid. But in any case, they are both now in captivity. They were supposed to be delivered to the knight's headquarters, but Sir Garin was there, and Eve couldn't take any risks. So Eve asks Mikhail to guard them until she orders otherwise. She also gives him the sorrel necklace she promised. Michael wonders why the Empress is doing this to her, but he doesn't need to know that. And Eve asks him to say he doesn't know anything if asked, but he asks to tell him if something like this happens again. Mikhail also mentions that next time she doesn't have to pay. He probably thought she was a poor princess who was being treated badly by her stepmother. But be that as it may, if he helps her, then it's a great success. And after that, Eve says that she needs to go somewhere. She came to meet the crown prince and the Empress. The Empress is unhappy that they touched her maid without permission. But Arentine doesn't understand what she's talking about and asks her to calm down. Eve herself invited the Empress because she had something important to say. She reveals that Lana was caught trying to poison her. A suspicious vial was also found in Lana's private room. Out of anxiety, Eve used the Arcania crystal. It wasn't poison, but it could cause a serious headache. Since there was insufficient evidence, Eve pretended to be ill for a few days. And one day, the maid noticed Lana going into the pantry. And then the maids, sensing something was wrong, called the knights. There was also an accomplice who gave Lana the potion. And it turned out that this maid was from the Empress's palace. Yves tells Argentina that the culprits are now in captivity. He orders them to be sent to the Ministry of Internal Affairs for interrogation. The Crown Prince asks the Empress for permission to undergo an examination. He also says they should find out about other accomplices. The Empress screams that there is no evidence that her maid did this. Eve lies when she says that, of course, she thinks that the Empress herself has nothing to do with it. But this way, they will be able to get to the truth before the Emperor arrives. Since the plan came out suddenly, there was insufficient preparation. But there is a limit to how unpleasant things can be. The Crown Prince is sorry that this happened when the wedding is just around the corner. He asks Eve to let her know if there is anything he can do for her. And now, Eve asks if she can stay in the big temple until the wedding. After Mother's words, Eve thought about spending time in the monastery. But life there is too difficult, so she would like to pray in the main palace. Arrington thinks it's a good idea, but asks if she's sure she wants to. Since Eve is on probation, she thinks it would be better to sit in the palace. But Aretnon says she no longer needs to remain on probation. After such shocking news, he is confident that the Empress will understand everything. She replied that they should do as they saw fit. Eve knows she left because she doesn't want to hear anything anymore. If Eve goes to the main palace, Arrington will order the knights to escort her. But she remembers that he must take the knights with him to the battlefield. Arrington asks His Majesty to remain here, so as not to leave the capital unattended. Eve knows that this will then change the course of the original events. He asks her to let her know if anything goes wrong. He wasn't always there for her, but he would help her if she needed it. And besides this, Arrington asks his sister to trust him. Looking back, Eve never tried to figure out what her brother was like. The more she interacts with him, the more she sees that he cares for her like a sister. So maybe from now on she will start to trust him a little more. Soon Eve arrives at the residence where she will be staying. In 5 days, the holy day of Lastan will begin, and lanterns will be lit near the temple. To mark this day, lanterns are placed around the temple. On this day, lovers take vows and make them together. The sanctuary of the god of crafts is located in the northern part of the garden. Eve understood everything and said that they could go, and that she would manage on her own from now on. Actually, Eve wanted to come here because she needed to get something from this shrine. The air near the residence was warm, but here it is, wintry and cold. After a short walk, the heroine finds the Temple of Lastan. She realized that this was where the lanterns would be lit. But, in her opinion, this holiday does not apply to her. Suddenly, the necklace on her neck sparkled brightly. She checked it and made sure it looked normal. In winter, the air is dry, so it seems to be static electricity. Suddenly, Michael Sheldon appears in the same place. In fact, he came here to protect the princess. It turns out that the Knights of Argentina are stationed here with the palace guards. Eve assumed that the commander had turned away from Mikhail because of yesterday. But it is his responsibility to keep Eve safe. He doesn't care if someone doesn't like him, because he's doing his job. And they also say that Princess Sorel and Prince Bilos are returning. At first glance, Bilos seems kind, but in reality he is a cruel person. For some reason, the Emperor treasures Bilos very much. Thanks to this, he also knows about the plan to kill Eve. But in the original story, he only appears after Eve's wedding. Eve thought that the Emperor already knew what happened yesterday. Or the Emperor assumed that the Empress would fail, so he sent Bilos instead. And if this is really the case, then she will have to prepare. Regardless of her attitude, Eve needs to make an ally out of Sorel. Sorel was loved by Mikhail, and later Terence would fall in love with her. Eve needs to try to improve her situation when Sorel returns. Despite this, Sorel always strove for Eve. Eve invited the other ladies, and they thanked her for it. And she, in turn, thanks them for accepting the offer. They mention that there was something bad mentioned in the sentence. After sending out the proposal to key members of the community, she realized they came out of curiosity. This incident could change the power dynamics in the imperial palace. She tells them what happened, and that's enough to get the idea. They assumed that Eve and the Duke were badly hurt. Now, we need to let the rumors spread naturally. There was a knock at the door, and Terence suddenly appeared on the threshold. It bothered him that such a horror had happened in his presence. He is truly sorry, because he should be protecting the princess. Eve asks him not to worry, assuring him that she is fine. The girl is genuinely shocked by the way Terence plays. He brought knights, and now he will check her safety every day. Terence also apologized for barging in so suddenly. He also said that they could go if the tea party was over. The ladies were just about to leave, so they leave. Along the way, they whisper that the rumors turned out to be true. Terence wonders why Eve chose this place if there is an imperial villa. Eve replied that she came here because she needed to find something. Terence promises to return tomorrow to report on the latest changes. Eve was surprised that he came to show people their relationship. Lady Diana has finished designing her dress and is ready to show it off. Diana was looking out the window when Eve came with her because she saw a black cat. She also heard about what happened in the palace, but Eve reassures her that she is okay. Diana brought several wedding dress designs. While Eve was talking about dresses, Diana asked if she had heard the news. And suddenly Diana says that Sorel and Billos had a serious fight. This is why Princess Sorel was put on probation. In the original story, they also fought, but Sorel was never on probation. Perhaps Eve's actions changed the original story, but in order to survive, she changed the original story. The main character will stay here until the wedding. Diana is happy that she will be able to see her more often than in the palace. At the party, you can write the name of your loved one inside the flower-shaped lantern. And if you are already lovers, the lantern symbolizes the desire for eternal love. 2 years ago, Diana also came to the festival to make a lantern. After the vision of Diana's death, Eve tried to see a new vision. The future can be changed, so Eve will stop hoping. Eve invites Diana to see the festival together this year. They can have dinner during the festival and then look at the lanterns. For a moment, Eve felt as if there was a light lightning bolt at her neck. Diana asked what kind of stone it was, which means she saw it too. Eve said it was a family heirloom from the Duke's house. As soon as the stone changed color, strange things began to happen. Eve thanked the maid for putting away her things. She also told her that there was one place where she wanted to go with her at dawn. Nell noticed one room that looked like a storage room. There is no furniture here, just some junk that is not being used. You can get into the attic through the hatch by pulling the cord. Nell did so, and a ladder leading to the attic descended towards them. There are many old books and boxes on it. Eve thought that this attic was really abandoned. She doubts she'll use it, so they can go. The girl thought that such an attic looked like something out of a movie. At night, Eve woke up Chloe to go to the place she wanted. They need to go through the garden and reach a small chapel. But as they walked, Chloe suddenly heard someone's footsteps. They had to hide in the bushes to avoid being noticed. Eve realized that the knight had noticed the light and now didn't know what to do. But suddenly, she heard a familiar voice belonging to Mikhail. The knight reports that he saw a light, so he decided to check it out. Michael decides to check this area himself and asks the knight to return. After he left, Michael told the princess that she could go out. Of course, he wonders what they are doing here at such a late hour. Eve has a personal matter, and she didn't tell anyone so as not to attract attention. Eve would be grateful if Sir Sheldon would allow them to continue on to the chapel. He agrees, but in exchange he wants to ask something. Mikhail wants to go with them because he has to ensure Eve's safety. Chloe is a bodyguard assigned by Terence, but since Eve has no choice, she agrees with Mikhail. Eve asks Sir Sheldon to keep everything he sees a secret. The sanctuary of the god of crafts turned out to be darker than Eve thought. The god of crafts is considered unclean, so no one looks for him. Mikhail shows the passage to the archive on the floor below. He worked here when he was younger, so he knows the place. This was also mentioned in the original story. Mikhail's appearance is more like that of a priest. Eve asks Chloe and Sir Sheldon to wait outside. What Eve is looking for must be somewhere inside the building. It turns out she was looking for a brick that was a different color. This mechanism reacts only to imperial blood. Inside there was a tree, the roots of which were creeping along the walls. In fact, Eve needs to get the juice of the sacred tree. This juice has tremendous healing powers. In the original story, Sorel will only find him 2 years later, but she will sell the guild juice to cover her living expenses. But for Eve, who is in danger of death, this juice is necessary. Eve mentally promises Sorel to repay her later for this juice. When Eve finished, she told them they could go back. She is sure that Mikhail is interested in what happened inside, but Eve thinks there won't be any dangerous consequences. In this case, Mikhail decides not to go into details. As long as the princess was safe, he had nothing to worry about. Michael knows for sure that imperial affairs can be complicated. Eve thinks Sheldon thinks she's pathetic for going through this. She decided to ask him if he knew that Sorel would be under house arrest. Eve would like to visit her because she has a lot to apologize for. Michael dared to ask why the princess hated Sorel. After all, Eve doesn't look like a person who would harm anyone. She decided to answer that it was all because she was jealous of her. After all, Sorel always had what Eve wanted: beautiful personality and powerful strength, love and attention. Eve was labeled a failure when she lost her powers. This envy turned into resentment. But Eve would never become like Sorel. Even in her past life, the heroine saw happy families. So she understands that despair can make you feel small. But this is no reason to allow yourself to harm others. Michael understands the feeling of having a brother or sister who excels at everything. Eve didn't expect Michael to know that Terence was his half-brother. When she asks about it, Mikhail confirms that they are brothers. But Eve knows that only Therese knows about this, judging from the original story. Although, she understands that she can't just ask Mikhail about this. Sheldon gives her necklace to Sorel, saying it would be better if she returned it herself. But Eve knows that Sorel probably doesn't even want to see her. But Mikhail is confident that Sorel will not treat this with hatred. He speaks with such confidence, as if Sorel had never hated her. That's why Eve wanted to ask him about it, but she didn't have time. All because Terence appeared in their field of vision approaching. For some reason, Eve feels guilty, as if she cheated. Eve asks him to eat because he arrived too early. But Terence himself asks her to eat, assuring her that he is fine. But Eve can't help but notice when her fiancé is upset. Terence reminds us that he will stop here before heading to the capital. Eve remembers this, but she didn't expect him to arrive so early. She finally tells him that she went out before dawn to get something. The girl reminds that Chloe was with her all that time, and Taryn wonders what she wanted to take at such a time. Eve explained that this tree sap could only be taken on certain days before dawn. Terence thought about what Sir Sheldon had told her about it. But in reality, Eve found out about this because of a vision, and Michael doesn't know about the juice. The main character explained that she needed this juice to survive, and the fact that she bumped into Mikhail was an accident. Terence noted that Eve seemed to know Sir Sheldon well. The air grows colder as Michael and Terence's complicated relationship unfolds. Eve doesn't want to ask about it, so she thinks about apologizing. Terence smiled and told her that she wasn't a very good liar. Eve was surprised, thinking that Terence simply didn't believe her. Terence realizes that Eve is not telling him something. The girl understands that she cannot deceive him with half-truths, but she can't say everything either, because she just moved here. She will have to pretend that she found out about her half-brother through a vision. Eve admits that the relationship between Terence and Mikhail seems strained, and she asks for forgiveness for saying something unnecessary. But Terence explains to her that he and Sir Sheldon have nothing to do with each other. Eve was embarrassed, saying that she hadn't meant it that way, and that Terence was only joking. He said that being around someone who sees secrets is not easy. Eve says she saw a vision in which Michael would help Terence. Since he found out that they are brothers, he wants to help him. Terence admits that Michael is his half-brother. Eve promises to keep it a secret, as only Terence knows about it. Regardless of what Eve saw, Terence doesn't want Mikhail near her. Eve thinks Terence is trying to restrain Mikhail, but Eve is sure that Terence meant the people of the Grand Duchy. This means that Terence is concerned about the succession of the title. In fact, Michael also has a right to the throne of the duchy. As long as Lot exists, in the event of Terence's death, the throne will pass to him. But if Lot also dies, then according to the law, the throne will pass to Michael. Terence fears that his family will become pawns in the hands of the emperor. But then, he could have eliminated Mikhail long ago if he was worried. Eve has no choice but to accept the Duke's position. Terence tells her that he is glad that they understand each other. His reaction was rather strange, and Eve felt her heartbeat quicken. Later, the maid reports the arrival of the priest from the main building. He brought documents about the preparations for the ceremony in the temple. The high priest ordered to convey apologies for the delay with the documents. Eve sees that the priest is afraid that she will be angry because she is late. If it were Eva in her place, she would find fault with every little thing. But Eve doesn't care. When Eve took the documents in her hands, she began to move them into the vision. She sees in front of her the building in which she is staying. There is fire all around the building. Real flames are blazing everywhere. Returning from the vision, the priest asked if everything was okay. Eve promised to study the report later and told them to go. After this, she asks Terence if Rastan's temple is made of wood. All the furniture inside the building was wooden, which is why a fire broke out. Terence noticed her strange behavior, assuming that she had seen a vision. When Eve told him, he asked if she had seen anything else. It happened at night, and there were lanterns hanging everywhere. This means that it happened on the day of the Rostan holiday. When they gave her the documents, Eve was thinking about the wedding, and the vision appeared at that moment. It seems they want to burn down the temple if they can't cancel the wedding. Terence is sure that if this is the Emperor's doing, then it will not be limited to simply disrupting the wedding. Since Terence is also thinking about this, they should exchange thoughts. Eve thinks so too, because it's too high a price to pay for ruining the wedding. For now, Eve isn't sure of anything. She doesn't know why there was fire. All they can do is remain cautious until they get more information. Terence promises to visit Eve upon returning to the capital. By the time they were talking, even the tea had gotten cold. Terence noted that even in private, Eve began calling him by his first name. He remembers how she used to call him Duke, but today, only by his first name. Eve apologized because she became too comfortable. She felt awkward and ashamed that she had done this. Terence heard her say that she felt comfortable with him. He told her she could call him whatever she wanted and left. The Rostan temple is so beautiful that it is hard to believe that the furniture is made of wood. The worker confirms that they are going to hang lanterns around the temple. Because of this, a fire from the vision may occur, and there will also be a lot of people here. If it is a planned crime, then the criminal will do it anyway. Actually, Eve would like to have more information. Sheldon approaches her, noticing that she is returning from the temple. Eve wanted to check out the temple in advance, because the wedding would be taking place there. Eve told Terence that she would not be intimate with Mikhail. Mikhail remembers that the festival will start soon. Previously, Eve thought that everything would be beautiful, but now she is scared. Eve asked Mikhail if he would also make a lantern with Sorel, but the man replied that he didn't want to do that at all. Instead, he will accompany the princess to the festival. Eve thinks that then he will spend time with Sorel as friends. Sir Sheldon leaves, asking Eve to contact him if necessary. The girl only hopes that Mikhail will soon get along with Sorel. Nell tells Eve that Grand Duke Terence has sent her a letter. He sent the letter quite quickly, a day after his departure. Terence soon returns to the Empire and invites Eve to attend the Marquis's party. He needs to be there to inform everyone about the resolved issues. But Eve doesn't understand why Trenise wants her to be there too. Eve ends up asking Nell to help her with Chloe for the party. It seems that nothing happened in the 2 days since Terence was gone. And it's true, fortunately nothing happened. Rostan's temple attracts Eve's attention, even though she can't do anything about it right now. Terence will soon gather materials to go on an expedition. He officially reported to the Crown Prince that he would cancel the expedition to the south. The Crown Prince promises to make an informal proposal to the Emperor. Eve wonders what exactly her brother said. Arrington also noted something suspicious about the latest incident. If the medicine and the maid's personality had been examined, the Crown Prince would have realized that the Empress was acting strangely. Arrington tries to help Terence stay in the Empire, and there is news that His Majesty the Emperor is returning to the Empire. Eve heard that Bilos and Sorel were coming back here too. These two were sent away before they knew about the Empress's affairs. The Emperor will return to the Empire in a week or 10 days. If the Emperor arrives before the wedding, the storyline may change. Terence reassures her, telling her that she has nothing to worry about. The Empress will not do anything rashly. The party will be noisy. Terence asks Eve to relax. Terence's hand was warm, but the uneasy feeling did not go away. Meanwhile, the second prince was asked if he would really go there. He said that since he had come all this way, he wanted to see his sister's face. Soon the Duke and Princess arrived at the party. People are whispering about the rumors that have been spreading lately. The slightest action turns into a rumor. Eve almost became a celebrity. Marchioness Cornell remarked how beautiful they looked together. Terence thanks her for the invitation, saying that it is nice here, and Cornell said she was honored they could attend the evening. She says that Eve is getting more beautiful every day. It's obvious she's trying to calm Eve down, afraid she'll ruin the party. The Marchioness heard that the Duke would soon go to battle. That was the plan. But fortunately, the situation in the south has improved, so there is no need for the Duke to be present there. Eve intervenes, asking the lady if she's not happy about it. If Terence had been sent there, Eve would have been tormented by anxiety every day. Eve hoped it sounded natural because she had been practicing, but for some reason, Terence still looks tense. Terence said that having the princess by his side was more important to him than any mission. Marchioness Cornell is glad that everything turned out this way. Eve even believed Terence's sincerity, thinking that he had also been practicing. Cornell decides to ask if the princess is still in the temple. She was told that something unpleasant had happened in the palace. It seems like everyone is secretly eavesdropping, so Eve has to tell. She can't believe that the maid she trusted put poison in her drink. Eve doesn't know the reason for the act, but the maid remains silent. Eve mentions that the Empress's maid was also involved. The Marquise assumes that the Empress is also worried. She was distracted by the butler, who urgently wanted to tell her something. He says that His Highness the Second Prince has arrived. Bilos approaches his sister and tells her how long it has been since they last saw each other. Smiling, he said he was glad to see she was safe. Eve assumes that the Emperor ordered Bilos to keep an eye on her. Bilos is one of the people involved in the conspiracy. Eve said that thanks to Terence she was safe. Bilos should thank him for Terence's protection of his sister. Terence says it's natural to want to protect his beloved bride. Bilos can't believe the rumors are true. Eve tells Bilos that he should calm the Empress down, as her son. Eve seems too sentimental to him, that she worries about his mother. Eve was sure he was surprised that she took his hands, but the girl hopes that she will be able to see a vision. Bilos is a bit busy, so he has to return to the imperial palace. Eve offers him some tea, since he just arrived. But Bilos doesn't want to interfere with their time together. Kissing her wrist, Bilos says that he will meet her soon anyway. At that moment, Eve finally found herself in the vision. She again had a vision of the day when the temple would burn. In the darkness nearby, the heroine notices some person. Under his clothes, he wears a priest's robe. The fire has already flared up, but this man is suspiciously calm. Then, Eve saw again the building she was staying in. The man lit a match and held it to the hanging lantern. He will start a fire only in the temple where the wedding will take place. And in the window, the main character notices herself sleeping. There are no knights to patrol near the building. The flames slowly spread into the room, but Eve is still sleeping. Now Willow had a strange feeling, as if her body was burning. She suddenly felt afraid, as if this was what death felt like. A moment later, the girl returns to reality. Of course, Bilos noticed that she was acting strangely, but Eve said she was just tired and apologized for keeping him late. She continues to think about the vision that appeared when she took her brother's hand. The main character realized that Bilos was behind this fire. After this, Eve told Terence about the vision. Terence suggested that Bilos wasn't doing it just to interrupt the wedding. Perhaps he wants to make it look like an accident and blame it on Argentina. Her brother sent her to the temple and also assigned knights to her. Everyone will run to put out the fire, and the sleeping Eve will remain in the room. Eve didn't see anyone running to help her in her vision. Terence thinks Eve was drugged with incense beforehand. Eve remembers that in the temple, there is a custom of burning incense. Bilos may have mixed incense on the day of the fire. The princess in the vision was sleeping very deeply due to sedation. Terence notices how worried she is and asks if everything is okay. Eve can't just give up just because she's scared. She promises to survive no matter what and not die according to their plan. Eve is going to pretend to fall asleep because of the incense. Eve can also recover quickly with a potion, but Terence tells her that she can't hurt herself recklessly if she can heal. After all, a man doesn't want a girl to be in pain. When Bilos returns, he slaps his assistant. He rudely asks if he is really unable to cope with the task. He guesses that Terence seems to have understood his father's plan. Bilos finds it strange that Terence, who hates Eve, fell in love with her. And judging by Eve's arrogant demeanor, Bilos believes she knows it too. Bilos was sure that the Duke had told her himself, but Eve could not understand everything so simply. He thinks Terence wanted to force Eve to side with someone he was at odds with. Terence could have gained something by being around Eve. And this time, Bilos intends to get rid of his sister. The assistant was first ordered to deal with the Empress's case, but Bilos cannot allow Sir Garin to contradict him. Bilos says he will set fire to the house where Eve is staying. The Grand Duke keeps Eve close only to avoid murder charges. And it won't hurt Terence. He won't care whether Eve is alive or dead. Bilos will take care of this no matter what. And he asks Garin not to interfere. Unfortunately, Bilos won't be able to keep his promise when he told Eve that they would see each other again. The next day, Eve thought about Terence's words, that they sounded like those of a man who was truly in love. Terence had said many things before that could be taken as caring. Eve didn't even realize she was thinking about it, which made her feel embarrassed. She was so unused to hearing that someone was worried about her. Being an orphan, the main character never heard words of care. Terence's anxiety may be due to circumstances, Moreover, according to the plot, Terence will one day fall in love with Princess Sorel. The fact that they are simply using each other in the relationship will not change. In the end, Eve can only trust herself. The princess's wedding dress is finally starting to take shape. Diana will need to add a few more details. Looking at the dress, Eve realized that the wedding was in 2 weeks. Diana went through so much trouble to make the dress. Diana was embarrassed and asked Eve not to say that. She also says that she and Eve might soon become related. Eve still wants to help Diana recover from her illness. The maid brought the princess and Diana some sweets. Now Eve will try to see the vision again and find a clue. The cookies that were brought to them are given out on the day of the festival. Eve didn't expect the cookies to actually be delicious. Eve wondered if she should send Sorel a gift for her journey to the Empire. Diana reminded that the festival will begin in 2 days. She is in anticipation and wants this day to come as soon as possible. Eve smiled, saying that she was also really looking forward to seeing him. Eve isn't sure she can make the lantern with Terence because he's busy. So Diana suggests making a lantern with her. Soon, Eve was informed that the chief chamberlain of the imperial palace had arrived. The man apologizes to the princess for the unexpected visit. The crown prince ordered the knights to be transported to the imperial palace. Eve didn't expect this and asked why he ordered it. All this is due to the lack of knights. Billow stated that there are not enough of them. Eve especially didn't expect to hear Billow say this.